The arena was not silent, but it was unsettled. Strange, nervous energy had permeated the air of the main event. A feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the rhythm of the night. The crowd in Chicago, usually raucous and unified in their chants, had dissolved into a low, anxious murmur. There were no flashing lights, no sudden blackouts, and no pyrotechnics to signal a change. Instead, the massive LED screens simply desaturated, draining the vibrant colors of the broadcast until the arena was bathed in a cold, sterile gray. The commentary team stopped speaking mid-sentence, their headsets pressed against their ears as they looked around for a cue that wasn't coming. It wasn't a technical malfunction. It was a deliberate atmospheric shift. The air grew heavy, thick with a tension that made the skin crawl. It felt less like a wrestling show and more like the moments before a severe storm breaks. Then, a sound began, not music, but a low, mechanical thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and into the chests of 50,000 people. It was uncomfortable, a dissonant frequency that killed the remaining chatter instantly. Fans in the front row stopped filming. Security guards turned from the barricade to face the stage, their postures shifting from relaxed to defensive. This wasn't hype. This was a warning. The darkness didn't snap shut, bled into the arena slowly, shadows stretching out from the stage like reaching fingers. In 2026, the audience was conditioned to expect instant gratification, viral moments, and high-speed entrainments. They were not ready for this slow, suffocating dread. The anticipation didn't feel exciting. It felt dangerous. Something old, something forgotten, and something incredibly angry was waking up, and the collective realization hit the crowd before a single face was even seen. She emerged from the shadows without fanfare, stepping through the curtain as if she were breaking through a membrane between worlds. Rhea Ripley did not pose. She did not stomp the ground to summon fire. She simply walked. The change in her was visceral and terrifying. 2 years away from the ring had stripped away the polished superstar veneer, leaving behind something raw and hardened. Her movements were stiffer, heavier, burdened by an unseen weight that seemed to drag the atmosphere down with her. She wore no elaborate entrance gear, just dark, utilitarian leather that looked more like armor for a street fight than a costume for sports entertainment. Her eyes, usually obscured by makeup or theatrics, were visible and shockingly dead, scanning the horizon with a predatory detachment that froze the blood. The reaction was not a pop. It was a gasp that sucked the oxygen out of the building, followed by a fractured, confused noise that sat somewhere between cheering and screaming. It was the sound of disbelief. Fans looked at each other, seeking validation that this was real. Was she cleared? Was this a segment? Did she look like that? As she marched down the ramp, the camera caught the fan interactions, children shrinking back against their parents, adults lowering their signs out of subconscious respect or fear. She ignored them all. There was no slapping hands, no acknowledgement of the camera. She was a ghost walking through a graveyard of her own legacy. The brutality of her presence was undeniable. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 2 years in a war zone, not rehab. She climbed the steel steps slowly, every motion deliberate, treating the ring not as a stage, but as a crime scene she was returning to investigate. The commentary team was struggling to find the narrative. Their voices were not the usual booming baritones of excitement. They were hushed, overlapping in genuine confusion. They spoke over each other, asking production for confirmation, questioning the legality of her presence. The audio feed picked up the genuine crack in the play-by-play announcer's voice as he noted the lack of medical clearance in the official reports. Inside the ring, Rhea stood in the center, the canvas beneath her boots looking fragile under her presence. The champion who had been celebrating moments ago was now backed into the corner, clutching the title belt not as a prize, but as a shield. The contrast was jarring, the polished, media-trained champion of 2026 versus the analog violence of a returning Rhea Ripley. Rhea didn't strike. She didn't speak. She slowly tilted her head, a signature mannerism that used to elicit cheers but now elicited a terrified silence. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing the scars of time on her face, the subtle twitch of a jaw clenched in suppressed rage. She looked at the championship belt, then up at the champion, and the look wasn't one of desire. It was one of disgust. The silence in the arena stretched for an agonizing 30 seconds in eternity in television. No catchphrases, no music, just the heavy breathing of the champion and the statue-like stillness of the nightmare. It was a masterclass in controlled intensity. The audience realized then that this wasn't about titles or rankings. She hadn't come back to compete. She had come back to judge. The verdict, written clearly in her cold, unblinking stare, was that the industry had become soft in her absence. The broadcast cut abruptly to the backstage area, breaking the suffocating tension of the ring but replacing it with chaotic motion. The camera shook, running behind Rhea as she stormed through the gorilla position. The producers, usually the invisible hands of the show, were visible in the frame, scrambling out of her way. Headsets were pulled off, papers scattered. A senior official tried to step in front of her, raising a hand to speak, but Rhea didn't even break stride. She shouldered past him with enough force to send him stumbling into a wall, the dull thud echoing on the microphone. This wasn't scripted backstage drama. It felt like a backstage invasion. She walked past the locker room area where the roster of 2026 had gathered around monitors. The new generation, influencers turned wrestlers, stared with mouths open. The disconnect was palpable. They were characters. She was a crisis. As she passed the women's locker room, the door was open. Current stars, women who had built their brands on social media engagement and viral clips, looked at her with genuine intimidation. Rhea didn't look at them. She was focused on the exit. The narrative being told without words was clear. The hierarchy had just been shattered. The locker room, once a place of camaraderie and content creation, had instantly become a danger zone. Her return hadn't just disrupted a match. It had destabilized the entire ecosystem of the company. The fear in the eyes of the roster confirmed what the fans felt the Predator was back in the enclosure, and nobody knew who was going to be the first meal. The show did not end with a brawl or a finisher. It ended in the parking lot. The night air was misty, the sodium lights casting long, sickly orange shadows across the concrete. Rhea reached her car, throwing her bag into the back with a motion that betrayed exhaustion. The adrenaline of the entrance was fading, replaced by the grim reality of what she had just started. A lone cameraman, daring to follow her this far, kept a respectful distance. For the first time, the mask slipped. Rhea leaned against the cold metal of the car door, her head bowing low. We didn't see a monster. We saw a human being who had just made a deal with the devil to return to the only life she knew. She looked up at the camera, her eyes glassy but hard. There was no promo. She simply whispered 3 words that chilled the spine more than any scream could have. It's all broken. It wasn't a threat to the locker room. It was an indictment of herself and the business she loved. She got in the car, the engine turning over with a roar that broke the silence of the night. As the taillights faded into the darkness, the screen didn't cut to a copyright logo immediately, lingered on the empty parking spot. The viewer was left with a sinking feeling in their stomach. This wasn't a triumphant return. It was a tragedy in motion. Rhea Ripley was back, but the woman who drove away seemed to know that this comeback wasn't going to have a happy ending. The nightmare had returned, not to dream, but to wake everyone up.